The moment I stepped out of the elevator, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the silence. Mondays were always graveyard quiet before the caffeine drip kicked in. It wasn't even the way people stared at their screens, pretending not to see me. It was the box. My box, sitting neatly beside the glass entrance like a stray dog no one wanted to deal with. 12 years of service. 12 years of crisis response, audits, emergency filings, all reduced to a cardboard cube with a pink Sharpie label. Olivia M. My stomach dipped, but my pace didn't change. I'd lived through regulators screaming at me on conference calls, reissued licenses on Christmas Eve, and once recalibrated a crossbar compliance system from an airport bathroom during a snowstorm. A cardboard box was quaint, actually. But then I saw it. My chair. My chair. The one molded to my spine after 12 backbreaking audit seasons, now occupied by him. The CEO's son. 27 years old. MBA from a school his father donated a building to. A man whose greatest professional achievement was scheduling a meeting without accidentally deleting the calendar invite. He spun slowly in my chair like he was posing for the cover of Failing Upward Monthly. His sneakers were on my desk, right beside a stack of regulatory filings he was holding upside down. "You're finished here," he smirked. The kind of smirk that comes from someone who has never experienced a consequence. For a moment, I just stared. Not angry. Not scared. Just observing. Like watching a toddler reach for an electrical socket. "I see," I said. I didn't ask for paperwork. I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't ask for the CEO, who I now noticed peeking from his office with the guilty posture of a man watching a slow-motion car crash he personally caused. Instead, I reached into my pocket, unclipped my badge, and placed it gently on the desk in front of the boy king. His smirk widened. "Good choice, walking away. We're modernizing. We don't need legacy roles anymore." Legacy. A pretty word for the person who kept this place legally alive. I didn't bother reminding him that my name, my signature, was on every active regulatory clearance across 12 states and 3 international jurisdictions. No one in this building could even spell half of those licenses without assistance. I simply nodded once, picked up my box, and walked out. No theatrics. No begging. No scene. Just clean exit velocity. As the elevator doors shut, I caught a glimpse of the CEO stepping into my area, rubbing his forehead. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but I could guess. "Tell me you didn't." A tiny hook of satisfaction caught in my chest, because he already suspected. He knew enough to be afraid, but not enough to understand how much I held. The moment the doors closed, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Not a message. A calendar alert. State bond clearance renewal. Final signatory check due today by 2 p.m. A renewal only I could approve. A renewal that triggered automated checks across every operational market we served. A renewal that, if missed, would freeze a billion-dollar lending structure until a new bondholder was vetted, approved, background checked, and recorded. 6 to 8 weeks, minimum. I stepped out into the morning air. The early sun barely warmed the cold metal of the box in my arms. My reflection ghosted in the building's mirrored windows, small, tired, but steady. Across the street at the cafe I'd visited every morning for years, the barista saw the box and mouthed, "Oh, no." I smiled. Not sad. Not broken. Just ready. Inside, I ordered my usual and took a seat by the window, watching the building I had kept alive for over a decade. The weight in my chest wasn't grief. It was clarity. A quiet, clean click, like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. They hadn't just fired me. They had removed the keystone and left the roof, walls, and entire structure suspended by nothing but arrogance. And arrogance collapses fast. At 10:17 a.m., while stirring my coffee, I saw the front doors of HQ fly open. A fleet black sedan pulled up. Out stepped a man whose arrival was never quiet. The principal partner of our largest investor. Over $1 billion under management, tied directly to our regulatory standing. He stormed inside. Not 5 seconds later, the CEO appeared again in the lobby, face drained of color. I couldn't hear him through the glass, but I could read the shape of his lips as the investor barked a single question: "Where's the woman who controls your regulatory clearances?" The CEO froze. And this time, I did hear him through the glass. A whisper carried by panic. "Tell me you didn't." I sat back in my chair, sipping my coffee. I didn't plan to watch the implosion. Honestly, I thought I'd finish my coffee, take a long walk, maybe call my sister, and pretend I wasn't carrying a cardboard box full of my old life. But when the investor stormed into the lobby like a man about to audit God himself, every instinct in me, the same instincts that built 12 years of spotless regulatory operations, told me to stay exactly where I was. I shifted my chair an inch closer to the window. Through the glass, I saw the CEO fumbling through pleasantries. His smile was stretched so thin it looked painful. The investor wasn't buying it. His hand gestures were sharp, his stance aggressively still. That was a man who'd just had $1 billion investment freeze in his inbox. It didn't take a genius to know why. Inside my bag, my phone buzzed again. Nevada Lending Authority. Signatory confirmation. Pending 11:59 a.m. deadline. A second buzz. Singapore Digital Asset Registry. Annual attestation. Overdue 1 p.m. A third. Colorado Division of Banking. Compliance follow-up required today. 3 reminders. 3 jurisdictions. 3 signatures that lived under one name. Mine. I closed the notifications and folded my hands on top of the cardboard box. Not vengeful. Not smug. Just aware. Aware of what they'd broken when they replaced competence with nepotism. At 11:06 a.m., the CEO's son, Liam, finally appeared at the lobby entrance. He looked paler than when he'd kicked me out 2 hours earlier. His expensive sneakers squeaked as he hurried across the marble floor toward the investor. That alone made my eyebrows lift. Liam never hurried. He floated, the kind of walk you learn when nothing you do ever has consequences. The investor cut him off before he reached the group, jabbing a finger at the folder Liam was carrying. I couldn't hear the exact words, but the investor's voice carried through the glass enough for the meaning to hit. Who signed these renewals? Liam started speaking fast, confident, like a student who didn't know the answer but hoped enthusiasm would distract the teacher. It didn't. The investor barked something so sharp the lobby receptionist jolted in her chair. The CEO pulled Liam aside, gripping his shoulder hard enough that the boy flinched. And then I saw it. The CEO dragging him toward my old office, my chair, my desk. The same desk he'd been spinning in when he fired me. Something curdled in my gut. Not satisfaction. Not even anger. Just the sour realization that they genuinely thought he could replace me. Across the street, the cafe barista, Maria, placed a fresh napkin on my table. She'd seen enough mornings of my tired face buried in regulatory spreadsheets to recognize that something bigger than office drama was unfolding. "You want another coffee?" she asked softly. I nodded, keeping my eyes fixed on the window. "Decaf this time," she snorted. No one orders decaf when watching their former employer combust. She wasn't wrong. Inside HQ, the investor had followed the CEO and Liam into the operations area. People stood up from their cubicles, craning their necks, instinctively sensing blood in the water. A herd of anxious meerkats, terrified of becoming collateral damage. At 11:18 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Internal attempt to access former credentials. Alert, unauthorized login. And another. Second attempt detected. System lockout in 60 seconds. That meant Liam, or someone equally clueless, was trying to break into the clearance system I'd built from scratch. I took a sip of my coffee, exhaled through my nose, and whispered to no one, "Good luck with that." The next alert came faster. Critical notice. Nevada license. Entering lapse status. Missing signature. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just watched through the glass as the investor rounded on the CEO, his voice ricocheting off the marble walls. Employees pressed themselves against cubicle walls, trying to appear invisible. A woman from legal rushed into view, holding her phone like it was a live grenade. Her lips formed one unmistakable sentence: she didn't sign it. The CEO's face collapsed. Liam's eyes went wide, then wider, then glassy. The investor turned to the CEO with a look I had seen only once before, in the Singapore regulator's office, when she told a fintech startup their license was suspended effective immediately. He said something short, precise, final. The CEO's shoulders sagged like he'd aged 10 years in 5 seconds. Then the investor's gaze swept the room, searching, hunting, and finally landing on the empty desk where I used to sit. His expression hardened. He knew the collapse had begun, and it wasn't even noon. I left the cafe when the investor disappeared deeper into the building. Not because I wanted distance, but because I wanted movement. Sitting still made the emotions too loud. Anger, disbelief, the bruised throb of betrayal settling into my ribs like old bruises. I carried the box down the block, past the bank where I'd filed half our collateral attestations, past the law firm that once called me a lifesaver during a deadline meltdown, and stopped at the small plaza across from HQ, a quiet bench under a skeletal winter tree. It gave me a vantage point and, more importantly, time. My phone vibrated steadily inside my bag. I ignored it until the buzzing became rhythmic. 3 alerts in quick succession. Colorado Division of Banking final warning sent. Singapore Digital Assets non-compliance notice issued. Nevada Lending Authority license officially lapsed. 3 breaker switches blown. And each one had a cascading effect. Nevada lapsing triggered crossbar freezes. Colorado warnings flagged any interstate transaction touching our systems. Singapore non-compliance froze digital asset movement, meaning every investor funneling money into the series round was now staring at a blocked screen. Each notice had my name under last authorized signatory. And each system recognized what HQ refused to acknowledge: no Olivia, no clearance. I breathed out slowly, watching my breath ghost into the cold air. I wasn't a vindictive person. I didn't weaponize my knowledge. I didn't build systems to punish. I built them to keep us compliant, funded, and operational through storms. But my departure had been treated like deleting a spreadsheet, like replacing a cog. And now the engine was seizing. Across the street, the building's revolving doors spun violently as an IT tech rushed out, phone to his ear, face stretched tight. He was followed by someone from HR, then one of the newer analysts from operations. They clustered on the sidewalk, talking in frantic circles. One of them pointed to a tablet in her hand. I knew that interface, the regulatory portal authentication. She looked like someone staring at an ancient language she couldn't decode. I looked away before any of them saw me. At 12:04 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, a text, not an alert, from an unknown number. Did you know this would happen? I didn't respond. Probably someone in compliance or legal, messaging the only person who'd ever fully understood the fragile balance of our structure. By 12:30, the plaza bench had grown cold beneath me. I opened my box and pulled out the one thing I'd tucked in last, my black leather notebook. My logbook. Every regulator, every renewal cycle, every signatory shift, every risk, patch, and workaround. 12 years of continuity stored in cramped handwriting. I flipped to the most recent page, where I'd scrawled the details of the Nevada renewal schedule 2 days earlier. My own handwriting stared back at me. Final deadline. Monday. No grace period. I closed the book. This wasn't about revenge. It was about responsibility. I had built a framework with a single point of failure because it was required by law, not by preference, not by ego. Regulators didn't allow shared signatures for certain bond-backed licenses. They required one accountable human, and that human had just been fired by a boy who thought compliance was busywork. A gust of wind rustled the branches above me. My phone buzzed again. This time, a call. Blocked caller ID. I almost let it ring out, but something in my chest nudged me. A sense not of regret, but of inevitability. I answered. Olivia. The voice was female, tense, controlled under pressure. This is Janine from the Singapore Oversight Committee. My spine straightened. We've attempted to contact your former employer, she continued, but their responses are inconsistent. Can you confirm whether you are still acting as their regulatory bondholder? A simple question. One that could shift the fate of every jurisdiction. I could have lied. I could have evaded. I could have let the company suffer quietly. But realism and the law didn't bend for emotion. No, I said. I was terminated at 8:57 this morning. I no longer have any authority over their systems. Silence on her end. Then, a pause. I see. Thank you. That clarifies our position. She hung up. I sat there, the world suddenly quieter, colder. Across the street, HQ was buzzing. Security at the door. Executives pacing like ants in a flood. People on phones with wide eyes and pale faces. The collapse wasn't coming. It had arrived. And I had no obligation, no right, to step back into that building. They had cut me out. And now the consequences had come to collect. By early afternoon, the plaza had turned into an unofficial observation post. Employees trickled out of HQ in pairs, some whispering, some pale, some visibly shaken, as if the building were releasing steam before an explosion. I stayed on the bench, my box at my feet, notebook resting on my lap, pretending to read, but my eyes stayed trained on the glass facade across the street. At 1:12 p.m., the first real sign of internal collapse appeared. A ripple of bodies surged toward the lobby. Legal, finance, operations, even the usually invisible back-office staff. They clutched binders, tablets, folders. Their faces were carved in panic. Then the CFO appeared. Mitchell, a man who always looked half asleep, half annoyed, like the world was an inbox he couldn't get to zero. Today, he looked electrified, alert in the wrong way. His tie was loose, his eyes wild, his movements jerky. He stepped outside like he needed air he couldn't find inside, hands braced on his knees. I'd never seen him bent over like that. The CFO of a billion-dollar company shouldn't look like he's trying not to vomit on a Monday. He took out his phone and dialed someone with trembling fingers. I couldn't hear the words, but I read his lips easily, find her. A moment later, he barked into the phone, no, find her now. My name, spoken with urgency. Spoken as a lifeline. Something twisted deep in my chest. Not satisfaction. Not pettiness. Something quieter, something that felt like regret, or maybe grief, because I had cared about this place once. I had cared enough to lose sleep, weekends, holidays. I had cared enough to keep them safe when they didn't know they were in danger. A memory rose sharply. 3 years ago, during an unprecedented audit, Mitchell had thanked me for catching a loophole that could have triggered a multi-million-dollar fine. He'd said, "You saved us." And I believed he meant it. Now he stood on the sidewalk, his hands pressed against his temples like he was suddenly realizing what 12 years of invisible labor had been worth. At 1:23 p.m., the CEO's son, Liam, burst out the doors. He wasn't arrogant now. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't lounging as if the world owed him applause. He looked terrified. He grabbed Mitchell's arm. The CFO flinched, shook his head violently, and said something sharp. Liam recoiled as if slapped. I leaned back against the bench. The wind stung my cheeks. My hands tightened around my notebook. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. My phone buzzed again. An email this time. Nevada State Financial Office. Subject, Urgent Regulatory Inquiry. I opened it. Miss Hale, we are attempting to confirm whether any authorized signatory remains at your former institution. Their representative has given conflicting explanations. Could you please confirm your termination in writing? As required by statute. My breath stilled for a moment. Required by statute. They needed it documented. They needed the missing signature formalized. And once I sent that email, the last thread tying the company to its active compliance would officially snap. This wasn't a threat. It wasn't emotional. It was administrative reality. I typed a one-sentence reply. I confirm I was terminated at 8:57 a.m. today and no longer hold authority or access to any operational or regulatory systems. I hovered over send. A taxi pulled up to the curb in front of HQ. The principal investor stepped out again, this time flanked by two associates. They moved with purpose, pushing through the doors with barely concealed fury. I looked down at my email. The truth was simple. Even if I wanted to help, I legally couldn't. A terminated signatory had no power. None of the fixes could happen until a new bondholder was vetted across all jurisdictions, and that could take weeks. My finger hovered, then pressed send. The email flew into the void. 5 seconds later, another alert hit my phone. Nevada license. Full suspension initiated. Prosper Fund Movement automatic freeze triggered. Colorado emergency review launching. The breaker switches were dropping one by one. Across the street, a shout echoed through the lobby glass. The CEO stumbled back into view, his posture crumbling. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Someone shoved a stack of printouts in front of him. Pages covered in red alerts, warnings, failure notices. His eyes scanned the papers, widening, face draining to chalk. He whispered something that reached me even from across the street. How did this happen so fast? A junior employee, someone I barely recognized, answered with a trembling voice, because Olivia was the only one with authority, and she's gone. I swallowed hard. Not pride. Not triumph. Just truth settling heavily. At 1:47 p.m., the investor's voice roared through the open lobby doors. Who fired her? A beat. Silence. Then a second, sharper demand. Who made that decision? The CEO raised a shaking hand and pointed directly at his son. The building went still. Completely, eerily still. And I knew the real reckoning hadn't even started yet. I didn't plan to go back inside. Truly, I didn't. I was content to sit across the street on that cold metal bench, watching the consequences unfold from a safe distance, watching the building that had consumed 12 years of my life finally acknowledge the work it had quietly leaned on for over a decade. But at 2:11 p.m., the lobby doors burst open again. And this time, it wasn't just frantic employees or panicked executives. It was the investor. And he was looking directly at me across the street, through traffic, through glass. His eyes locked onto mine like he'd known exactly where I was the whole time. He didn't shout, didn't gesture wildly, didn't beckon. He simply nodded once, no request, not an order. A nod that said, I know what you did. I understand why. Please. The CEO and Liam followed behind him, but their faces told a different story. Fear. Desperation. The realization that pride had cost them something irreplaceable. For a brief moment, I almost stayed seated. Almost. But I stood. The walk across the street felt longer than it should have. My heartbeat steady, my breath measured. 12 years of invisible labor forming a spine I hadn't realized had grown so strong. The investor met me at the door. "Olivia," he said. His tone wasn't kind, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the voice of a man who respected competence when he saw it. "We need to talk." I glanced past him. The CEO looked 10 years older. Liam looked like a child caught breaking something he didn't understand. Employees stood frozen, watching. I stepped inside. The lobby felt colder than the air outside. Stiller. Every whispered conversation stopped as I passed. The investor guided me to the main conference room. Legal was there. A few board members. The CFO, still pale. And the CEO, who couldn't seem to meet my eyes. The door closed behind me. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, the investor gestured toward the stack of regulatory failures on the table. "Can you explain what happened?" he asked. I nodded once, calm, controlled. "You removed the only person authorized to sign your active licenses. Some jurisdictions allow a transition period. Others don't. Nevada doesn't. Singapore doesn't. Colorado definitely doesn't." I paused. "And you fired me on renewal day." A few people winced. I continued, voice steady. "When the deadlines passed without signatures, the systems triggered automatic freezes. Once one jurisdiction froze, CROSPR compliance flags triggered additional freezes. It cascaded. I didn't soften it. I didn't dramatize it. I just told the truth." The investor folded his arms. "Can it be fixed?" I took a slow breath. "Yes," I said. "But not quickly. A new bondholder has to be approved by each state and international committee. That process normally takes 3 to 8 weeks. 3 to 8 weeks of halted activity. 3 to 8 weeks of frozen capital. 3 to 8 weeks of an investor unable to move a billion-dollar portfolio." The investor glanced at the CEO. "This was avoidable," he said flatly. The CEO's voice cracked. "Olivia, we didn't realize." "No," I said softly. "You didn't want to realize." Silence spread like smoke. The investor cleared his throat. "We would like to offer you a reinstatement. Full salary restoration. A 5-year equity package. A dedicated department." I raised a hand. They went quiet. "I appreciate the offer," I said. "But no." Liam's mouth dropped open. The CEO looked physically pained. The CFO exhaled like he'd been punched. "No," the investor repeated. "No," I said again. "Not after being treated as disposable. Not after 12 years of doing the work no one wanted to understand. Not after being replaced by someone who didn't know what they were replacing." I turned to the CEO and Liam. This wasn't sabotage. This wasn't revenge. This is what happens when you remove critical infrastructure and pretend it was ornament. The room stayed silent. Finally, the investor asked quietly, "Then what do you want, Olivia?" I reached into my notebook and slid a business card across the table. My business card. Hail Compliance Solutions. Regulatory architecture and multi-jurisdictional oversight. "I want to build systems without being ignored," I said. "Without having to fight for resources. Without carrying an entire company in the dark." The investor picked up the card, studying it slowly. He nodded. "I'd like to talk about contracting with your firm." Behind him, the CEO sagged in his chair. Liam looked like he might be sick.